Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Magnetic Growth Podcast, where we essentially try to help you launch, grow, and scale crypto projects. And to do that, we leverage top guests in the industry that are doing this in different verticals on a daily basis. And today I'm joined by Tony Drummond, who is the founder of Tokenomics.net. Tony has a bit of a proven track record, speaking off cam for a little bit before this session, and he's been around for over 3 years in this space. He actually started out by building his own project that went to a $200 million market cap, 200,000 members in the community. He's also helped over 40 teams raise over $50 million in this space. And yeah, tokenomics is such an important part of any growth strategy. It can accelerate a project's growth, it can kill a project's growth, and that is going to be the topic of this session. So tokenomics is a growth engine, and hopefully also indicating on what the future of tokenomics and sustainable tokens might look like. Tony, how are you today?
Awesome, Jake. Thanks a lot for having me. Really appreciate it. And I'm excited to continue the conversation and also help a lot of founders understand tokenomics, which for me, as I built my own project, was something I had to learn, unfortunately, very painfully, to the tune of $10 million of selling pressure. So I hope help other people to avoid a lot of these issues through our conversation today, and also enlighten a lot of the founders. And I assure them if they pay attention to this, they'll have more value than any other video they'll watch when it comes to tokenomics and how they think about their own token and its economy. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. I think that's a great starting point. You have been here before becoming a consultant as a project founder, someone running all of the angles, wearing all of the hats. Tell us a little bit more about your journey as a founder and also what you learned.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm 43. I know people say I look a little younger, which is great for me. I'm an older man, but I have over 20 years of traditional business experience across every role. I've been in crypto since 2017. It's when I first joined. In 2021, I started my own project. And our project, think about Tamagotchi, but for the memes in kind of in our space. You can own your own meme. You can use it as your digital pet. Of course, it exploded. Of course, it went viral. In that project, we launched it at a very fair market cap valuation of $550,000. Had over 70% of the supply was to the community and distributed in the beginning, which you don't even see today. It's extremely rare. And the project launched at a low market cap, very much community oriented. Within 3 weeks, it grew to over $200 million in market cap. We went from 0 to 75,000 on-chain holders. We had over $30 million inside of our liquidity pool in actual BNB. We sold 50,000 digital pets, and all this, again, within the span of 3 weeks. And then the bear market started about a month or so after, or a couple months after I launched. And then I had to navigate all that pain on the way back down, right? When you're all the way up here and then the bear market starts, that's not going to be good, because even the altcoins go down 90, 95%. So to think you're a little tiny coin will not go down 90 to 99%, you're kidding yourself. Right. So that's also the things I've navigated. Coming out of that, I became very passionate about helping founders and sharing all my learned experiences. This is everything across building the product, growing the community, doing all the marketing strategy, literally spending $2 million marketing and developing in this space. And that's the frame I wish every founder sees me through, is not just the tokenomics guy, but as someone who's literally been in their shoes before, that's made their mistakes to the tune of a lot of money in pain. Had to correct those mistakes. That's why I became passionate about tokenomics, is all I had to do to be able to learn to correct a lot of things in my own project. And then again, that was an area where I just felt like so many things were wrong in what I saw in the space, and I felt I could help a lot of projects. So I've been consulting in tokenomics now for about 3 years at this point, and I also own a creative agency where we help projects with their communications. Again, a confused mind will never buy, so that's why we started Convert, to be able to help projects understand how to communicate and sell their project with, clarity there. So we have 2 different companies now. Both of them are like one fed the other, because I had so many people who do the tokenomics, then like, what else next? So I started the other company to help them there, and both have been growing as a result. And we work with many marketing firms like yourself, Jake, and that's what we do, is we help them with the content, the strategy, the communications, the narrative. And I run that with a partner named Mike, and he recently ran Ken & Thompson, Mike Tyson's production company. So we have like an all-star team to be able to help projects there. We're not a marketing agency, though. I like to make that distinction very clear, or pure creative.
Awesome. What would you say were your key learning lessons from that you feel you're constantly relaying to founders that you work with now from your experience in your own project?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, one of the first things I would say is people want to pump, right? They want the chart to go up. I mean, everyone who's a founder that has a token wants that. because you almost take it in your own ego, right? If it doesn't go up, then you feel like you failed in some way, right? And granted, it could be the market conditions, could be any number of things, right? But the thing I learned is everyone wants the pump until, in my case, you go up 375x in 3 weeks. Now, if you had a problem, your problem that was attached to your token price, that also just went up that much in that span of time. I mean, that to me was something that, thinking in advance, how you run the math, how you do the analytics, how you think about your growth and the potential selling pressure and how all the mechanics work, that would have been one thing I would have done quite differently. The other thing is, also at the time in the space, a lot of tokens had taxes, ours did, which helped with funding the marketing, which helped with the liquidity. Right now, I didn't expect to have that much volume would come in. And we had a lot of the tax volume was going to build up the liquidity pool. So as it was growing, as volume came in, and we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars of volume. I mean, it was significant. I mean, to the tune where at the top, we have $30 million of BNB inside the liquidity pool within 3 weeks. That tells you something. That's a lot of volume. Now, as that's rolling in, that volume then is being captured through the tax, and it's building the liquidity pool. But the problem is, as you're building that up, it sounds great, right? But when you're building all that up all towards the top, now think about this. Now you have so much liquidity, it's hard to pump the price any longer. So you stall out, and now you've been way up here, you're pumped up, and now you have nowhere to go but down because you've been up so aggressive. That's what happened. So it went up like a hockey stick. You're way up top, the bear market starts. BNB falls in price because Bitcoin's going down, then your chart goes down. People start selling because now they're panicking, then your chart goes down. There's not as much volume, so you can't go up as much, that goes down. You got too much liquidity, you can't pump the price. Now you can't, see what I mean? So you look at how all that ties together. That's something that I wish I would have understood in more detail, right? Because I didn't get how all those connections worked in my mind. We're putting together the pool, we're building the product. People are excited about it. They're buying it like crazy. In our minds, it's insane. This is working so well. But behind the scenes, we had that problem that was brewing. That's what I would say would be my biggest learning lesson. That's why I'm so passionate today about this, is you have to go through everything. You have to think about how big it can be. You have to think about how it scales. You have to think about, if I take my race car out of the garage, yeah, I might be fine driving at 10 miles an hour, but when I blow it down, or kilometers, here for the US here, your audience is, right? Whatever. I'm not going to hit the gas and immediately gun it, have this thing going like 200 kilometers an hour or whatever. I'm not going to do that in the car, right? I'm not going to do it because it's going to be silly to do that, and the wheels might fall off, the engine might break. Well, that's my whole point. Is the advice I would say is you want to think about sustainable growth and higher price floors over time. You want to think about building sustainably instead of trying to rush and trying to be so much into pumping and everything else. I mean, you really want to think about the whole strategy and how everything fits together would be, one of my biggest learning lessons, and also my most painful one.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable lesson. I think a lot of people in crypto just want to run towards launch and figure it out after. I mean, we're very big advocates for always considering your post-TG strategy as you're considering your pre-TG strategy, because very often you can start dishing out tokens left, right, and center to try and generate that initial, what looks like awareness, but that doesn't necessarily convert to long-term sustainable growth. So as you'll know, post TGE comes and you've dished out loads of tokens to try and create this fake artificial noise. And all that does is bring selling pressure, and your token is your greatest growth asset. Your marketing, your greatest marketing tool is your chart in some regards. So yeah, it's such an important topic to dissect. And if someone does want to build a great token, from a tokenomics perspective, again, I'm sure you could talk about this for days.
Yeah.
But a couple of key points, like a couple of the very, very big points, building sustainable tokenomics that lead to a great token. What are your top kind of points that someone should think about?
Well, I'll get to that, but I want to riff on something you said before around the incentives and how people are, incentivized to come in. Well, first of all, when you're selling your tokens on your launch pad, who are you selling those to? In my case, we showed the community like what we were building. We got them all excited about it. They wanted their pets. The only way to get the pets was with the token. So when we sold the tokens on the launch pad, it was the people who wanted to use them. See the difference? Most people, when they think about, let's just sell tokens, well, is that to your audience? Is that just some random launchpad audience and just going to pump and dump? Or are these people who actually want to use your product? Like, how did you set up your strategy of your community and your marketing and education so people understand what they're buying, and you have it in the hands of the people who want to use it, lock it, whatever the case might be? That to me is one of the biggest mistakes. People just give out a whole bunch of stuff and wonder why didn't it work? Well, that's why. You gave it's like if everyone comes into my restaurant, I said, everyone can eat. everyone will eat the food and hardly anyone will complain, right? But when they have to start paying for it, that's a whole different thing altogether, right? So people will always take the free thing. They'll take advantage of that, right? Every single time. So you want to be mindful of that and make sure that that is actually getting you the result that you're looking for. Okay. Now, when I'm designing it, the last thing I'll say as well, like let's say, for example, you have 1% of the supply and we're talking about a $50 million market cap project, FDV. Well, it's $5 million. Well, if in your liquidity pool, you only have 500,000, right? That's only 1% of that FDV, right? Now, if I give out 1% of my supply, let's say I had that 10% allocation broken off for my incentives. I give out 1% of the supply initially. I've given out my entire liquidity pool value. So if people sell, they kill the price, right? So if I'm at 50, let's say half of those people that got just 0.5% sell and strip away the 250 grand, you're going to cut your market cap down from 50 million to right around 25 million off of that. See it? And so that's where people make these mistakes, is they don't understand the connection of the selling pressure to the pool erosion, which affects all their prices, of the token, right? If you give people incentives and those are in their DeFi wallet, you think they're going to transfer to a centralized exchange to sell and get taxed, or you think they're going to sell in DeFi? Like this is the mentality that I would say, the psychology, after tracking all the wallets, seeing what's happening, like that's the stuff I would ensure that people take away when it comes to designing their token for success, would be thinking about these mechanics at their core, thinking about liquidity at its core, right? Because if you don't understand how liquidity flows, then how are you going to know what you're just looking at percentages, investing in cliffs and token allocations, but you're not understanding that, hey, if I'm distributing a lot of value quickly and people sell, well, that's going to be a problem. If I have hardly anything in the pool, then it takes hardly any buying pressure to pump the price. And if its price pumps high and I have inflation, well, I just made all the tokens being released more valuable. If those are sold, then that kills the price. So now you have a pump and dump chart. It's like an EKG machine. It's like the heart monitor's on you. Your chart's like a freaking heart monitor up and down. It's like, wow, look at that. Why does that exist? There's no liquidity there, right? And then the bots get into it. The bots start, sandwiching attacks your trades and stuff like this, right? Or if you got too much, you don't go anywhere, right? So one of the most important things, again, is understanding liquidity. Now, with that being said, when we think about the token itself, a common question that people will ask, and they try and pigeonhole or to put founders on the spot, is why do you need a token? It's almost like, aha, you don't need a token, right? The question I like to ask, though, is how does a token make it better? Okay, can a token actually make the system better? And I'll give an example. I had one of my clients, and this is very much a traditional business type model where they have enterprise organizations that are looking to use blockchain technology. We understand enterprise is coming into our space. The problem is education. How do they learn about how these tools work? You're going to make a huge investment. You want to be very educated. You need to see case studies and see how it worked. You got to sell it to your internal team, right? So when you look at in a little enterprise, the sales cycle is really long in these organizations because they move very slow and they make very methodical decisions, right? So if you consider that, and we say, all right, we need enterprise to come into this space, because there's value in the blockchain tech, but how do we get them in here? Well, the way we get them in there is through education and through content. Okay, so in this example of this token, what we did is we incentivized content creators to put content on the platform, and they start to earn some of the tokens. Okay, and the whole point of this now, and that's before it's even live, they'll have a virtual one they're earning. You test the system, you can give them points, you can see how it's working. My whole point is, you're starting to see the network and the system with valuable data, right? Because if you don't have any content there, the enterprise won't be interested in it. There's nothing for them to look at, right? So you need initial startup in this cold start type model. A lot of projects suffer from this. They have the cold start problem. Like, for example, eBay. How do you start up eBay if you only have people that are selling items but no buyers? How do you start up eBay if you only have buyers but no sellers? You can't, right? So when you think about your token, you got to think about the cold start problem and how you're using it as incentives potentially in the beginning. Now, in this example, we'd have the content creators creating educational content for enterprise. They're on there. They're able to earn their tokens, right? They're incentivized to do that. Granted, it's not live. Nobody's selling anything yet. We're seeing how the system works. We're starting it up. They know they're the early pioneers. We're rewarding them for being the early people here, right? And maybe it's content they already have, but now they're distributing under this umbrella in a more focused way. Now, once that content is there, now you can go to enterprise and say, hey, we have this library that's helpful for you. You can go in this, you can learn about how to use this blockchain technology. For example, maybe you're a cannabis provider here in the US, you have to track seed to sale. Every single tiny thing has to be tracked in supply chain. That would be a great use case on the blockchain, right? Across all the different providers, to have it all transparent and trustless, that would be great. Now, the problem is, how does a how does, in this case, an enterprise become educated in that? And that's through the content that you have. So now you've fulfilled that. Well, now that you have the enterprise there, now you can also have vendors that are interested in providing those solutions to the enterprise. So you have 3 stakeholders now in the system. See how it's all starting up, and the vendors have to use the token, spend the token. The enterprise have to use the token, spend the token. Okay, and so now if you thought about that, it's kind of starting everything up in kind of a flywheel. The last thing I would say is, and this is where a lot of projects go wrong too, is they don't think about revenue. So in this example, we came to the realization that an enterprise company learning about blockchain doesn't have a wallet. They don't have an enterprise, they don't have an institutional account. They can't set up. So now you have friction. And I understand this as a marketer. So in this example, what I told the client, I said, for enterprise, everything should be credit card, payments, all this, and the rewards in the back end route down and go to the content providers from that. You have different payment rails that route, right? So the whole point is, now we've actually enabled, at least in this case, everyone that participates to have value through the system, and it's a token that we've designed around that, right? So the most important thing, again, to think about is who's participating, what are their challenges or issues, and then how does the token or ecosystem help them? And that is how you tie it all together. And if you don't think about it that way, you'll end up with like some random token that exists to be pumped. You know what I mean? And that's the way it's different for each project. So yes, it could be an hour-long conversation, at minimum, and just this area, but it's different for every project. But that's one of the most important things. The next thing is also looking at your fundraising strategy. So now that you have a good design, something that seems sustainable, it fits, now you make sure that you have your market caps figured out right. Because if you're too high, no one will invest in you. If you're too low, again, no one will invest in you in some cases, right? If you don't have it, if you're not asking for enough money, no one will invest in you. If you're asking for too much, again, no one will invest in you. So there's all these little tiny details that you have to get right. For that, what I do is research. Okay, I'll go on ICO drops. I'll look at what raised privately before in these niches. I'll do research there. I'll go on the launch pads and I'll look at what's launching now. Fjord Foundry, for example, I know that they usually have on average a $25 to $75 million kind of like their scope of what I'll normally see on a project on Fjord Foundry. Granted, you could be a little lower or higher. That's normally the range. And that's normally the range in most launch pads. So in your case, if your project is a $100 billion FDB, most launch pads will not be a fit. You know what I mean? So you just walled all that off. So it's a matter of doing the research and just thinking methodically about building all this. Real quick, I have to drop something. Tokenomics.net, free course, free template. You can enter your email right now. 2 advanced templates, fully automated, and a 20 video course that talks about all this stuff in detail. Okay, that way your audience can get all that for free right now. There's nothing, it doesn't pay for it, nothing. It's all free. Okay, and that I think will help a little bit too.
Yeah, I think there's some really good points there. I think one I want to raise it, kind of go into a little bit more is fundraising, right? Because the market that we've seen in the last 12 months has changed. People used to sign up for 3-year vestings, and now they rarely do that. And that's because more shiny objects are being chucked in front of investors in this space with lower and lower and lower vesting tabs. You've seen VCs move into meme coins or moving heavily onto OTC so that they can hold and own their supply. Like in the space, we often look at VCs as kind of using retail as exit liquidity. And back in the day, that was probably a very fair point. But now, in a lot of alts launching in these sort of markets, is there ever going to be retail in those markets to actually be exit liquidity? Therefore, from an investor's point of view, they're thinking, okay, this seems a bit more risky. The market dynamics have changed, and therefore I want my tokens quicker. And if you don't give me the tokens quicker, then I'm not going to invest. I'm going to invest in this other project that's going to give me 50% on unlock, for example, which we know from a token perspective is not sustainable to start dropping huge amounts of supply out the door that can be sold without any fight back. So I think I want your opinions on this, because there isn't a right or wrong answer, but I feel like a lot of founders want to set out with a sustainable tokenomics model when it comes to vesting, and they can start looking at, okay, based on the amount of tokens that are being vested and when they could hit the market, we think we can generate a good buying pressure to be able to at least meet that selling pressure at equilibrium, and therefore the chart on liquidity doesn't get wrecked. However, people don't want to buy into the fallacy that they have for their tokenomics, because it's not fair for the investors, and investors have been stung waiting 3 years for an unlock when the market's already wrecked within the first 3 months. So with a founder being in that position, do they just go, let me just get the money in and I'm going to chuck my sustainable tokenomics model out the window? Or do you get them to stick to their guns, which might mean they don't get the funding and therefore they have to maybe go down a different route?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say the dynamics of the market changes quite significantly in the investors too, the VCs. Like, for example, if you understand that a fund, a lot of times their contracts, they have to deliver like in 5 years, they have a return, they have to provide, right? And if you look at the altcoin market, it's been very tough. So I would say if you're going to fundraise in this environment, don't just consider VCs as your only pathway. Look at alternative financing as well. Like you can do private funding through friends, family, through typical accredited investors, seed angel. There's all kinds of different ways you can get money. So I would say the VCs are not the only pathway. That to me is one of the biggest mistakes I see projects make, is they think that's the only pathway to launching. It's not. And truth be told, most VCs are not interested in the majority of projects. There's a very small majority that are there, right? They're going to be looking for like at least the tier ones, tier two are going to be looking for like insane teams and people who've done stuff before in their career. A lot of people are founders just starting out, right? So you have to realize and be honest with yourself of where you're at in your state. But don't ever think that VC is the only pathway to fundraising. I'll touch on how I help the client navigate this in a second here. Now, when it comes to the actual vesting terms themselves, I've been one where I am always a fan of sustainability, because I think like if I'm ethical and I tell a founder, hey, you can go this route and then, have hardly any vesting or whatever. I just had a guy yesterday kind of doing this. If you go that route, yeah, you could do it. You might raise the money, but that's your reputation, that's your anxiety, that's you when it doesn't work well and the price starts crashing and all these issues come in. That's going to be your face after people are dumping on you. And when I talk to people really in a realistic way like that, then they realize like what the future state might hold for them if they make some of these decisions. Like if you just make the vesting schedule, it used to be 3 years, now it's only 1 year. Well, that's significant selling pressure that could come in that could destroy the project, right? So I would say funding solely through your token because you're not making any revenue, that is a big issue. Okay, so what I would say instead is, how in your business model can you make revenue? Is there a way that now you have a real project, a real thing that makes money, how you can raise some equity off of this and also sell some of your token, right? So now if the token fails, people actually own a real business. And this to me is one of the most important things, is they attach the token as their sole business model is everything. And we know the bear market will come, and we know we'll have like 3 years of down and 1 year of up, right? So now your business is planning to have something attached to it that people immediately will say, well, that business sucks. And it's just your token. I mean, it's like, so that's what I would say is like, when you think about your fundraising, think about the future state and what might happen and how the market conditions work and how all that works is no matter what, you're going to have these issues. And you don't want to build them in necessarily when you're fundraising off of this, right? So you're going to want to make sure, first of all, you're not raising too much money. If you put, for example, if I say I want to raise $5 million and I'm selling 10% of my supply, now I'm already at a $50 million FDV in the private round. Now, to get public a return, I might have to double that to 100. Remember what I said before, 100 might be too high for a Launchpad. Now I screwed myself, right? So as they do this stuff, they don't understand the connections and how the future state plays out. So I would say is most founders understand the mechanics of what you're going to do, the steps you're going to follow in the future. So you know what you're designing for the future, right? And that's what I would say. So for example, if you're just designing your vesting just to get the money in, but you're not understanding that, hey, at this valuation, a Launchpad won't list me, whatever your goals are, you just wreck yourself, right? So you need to understand what all those steps are and plan that out for yourself and work backwards from there. That way, when you're making these decisions, you know what you're in for. So if you make a decision and say, hey, we need the money in right away, we're okay with vesting terms that are a little more aggressive, whatever, at least you know why you made the decision instead of the decision was made just because we need more money. And you also understand what's going to come next and how that might impact you. And that's what I would say is the biggest gap is people are just at the time of, and they're not thinking about the future. And they don't understand what can happen to them. As I mentioned, I'm not throwing stones because that's what happened to me. You're not thinking about where it could go in the future or how, if that happens, what might happen. That's the result of it, right? You're not planning all that. So I would say is really carefully understand what you're going to do in the future and plan for that. My vesting terms, a lot of times with clients, will do like a 6-month cliff, 24 months vesting. So that's over the course of like 30 months, they'll get all their tokens. Now, this is more majority for private. Now, in the US, due to the rules and regulations, some investors, they can't even legally have their tokens until one day after the first year point is marked. So there's legal requirements you have to consider as well through this type of work, right? But I would say like the investors, yes, they're going to want like vesting schedules, but I also know like that are more aggressive, but I also know like They're not pushing project, at least from what I hear, to be like a year or something like really crazy. I think most are normally kind of reasonable at this state. I haven't seen a whole lot of projects that did raise with these really crazy vestings. It happens once in a while, but most I think are kind of in that realm. But the problem is they're launching at such a high valuation because the investors push them to do that, that now they can't even raise any at public. Like for example, Cato, if it's going to launch at a $500 million FDV or whatever it was, how's it going to raise any money through the public? What's it going to do? Sell one?
Yeah, the upside gets,
There's no.
the upside gets affected massively for sure. And I think that's why we've seen meme coins succeed in a way, because one thing that is good about memes, there's obviously many bad things as well. Let's not forget that. But one good thing is that they obviously launch at much lower FTVs, and therefore they give communities the opportunity to get in and actually make a return. And I think, again, there are a lot of downsides with actual launch tokenomics of a meme. For example, most of the time we actually don't know, unless you're a bit of an on-chain wizard, then you know where the tokens are. But yeah, one thing is for sure that if you launch a coin at a 500k market cap, 100k market cap, a million market cap, and you got a good team behind it and know what they're doing, then they can navigate that up maybe to that 20, 30, 40 mil mark. And then anyone who got in early is going to be super stoked and, your biggest supporter moving forward, and can really activate a network effect. And then, like you said, retail are not as silly as they maybe used to be. And they're aware of things like FTVs. They're aware of being able to analyze whether a project actually has upside or not. And I think from things like meme coins, people have learned how to read charts. They've learned how to read on-chain data. And therefore, if you are going to go and launch a token at a crazy valuation, that valuation on FTV that you simply cannot back up or sustain, then your opportunity to get retail win is much lower. I mean, I've seen utility projects launching at $3-4 million FTVs and still struggling to get buying pressure, when if they launched 3 years ago, they probably could have got away with a 500 million FTV. So yeah, I think there's definitely navigation in the market. And I guess kind of coming towards the end of the session, that's the last point that I really want to get from you. Where do you see this industry navigating towards, and how do you think tokenomics can be innovated to kind of support where this market is moving?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to touch on, first of all, I agree with all your points, and it's definitely different times now. I think Pump Fund messed up a lot of the altcoin liquidity, especially this cycle. It was crazy how much it sucked away, right, through scams, and hardly anyone made any money there anyway. One thing I wanted to touch on was how people can also fundraise. Like, you don't have to just go through VCs. Like one client, he has like these power purchase agreements that are going to be on, like, it's solar on people's roofs and on like these companies' roofs. Like, I'm talking a packaging company that might do like 30 million a year in revenue, right? They're using a lot of power. So in this way, I told them, hey, you have 3 pilot projects interested, go to each of those 3, raise some money from them, let them fund kind of their own project on their roof. You'll give them a yield on that. They'll buy the token, and you'll have the seed funding to be able to start this whole thing up without even messing with VCs. It's like, wow, that's different, right? So my whole point is, before I go to the last part, is you got to use your mind first and you got to use your money second. Okay, that's how you want to think about this stuff. And most people use their money first and go all into VCs and just pay people to fundraise for them, and it just becomes a mess. So I would say just consider some alternative paths. Now, when it comes to future state of the industry, I personally believe like we'll see a lot more tokens, and I'm kind of banking on that. I believe a lot of things will be tokenized. I have people reaching out constantly. I have a guy later on who's going to tokenize like actual raw earth materials and things like this. And, so I think we will have a far different landscape of tokens in the future. And the reason for that is because the infrastructure has gotten a lot better. Like even 4 years ago when I had my project, it was launched in October of 2021. We have significantly better infrastructure. We can get people into the system a lot easier. We can get liquidity into the system a lot easier. Before, a lot of that stuff wasn't even there. I mean, it didn't exist. Regulation wasn't in place. The banking rails weren't in place. I mean, so when I look at the maturity of the industry, and I also look at the companies that are coming into the industry, that's something that makes me extremely excited. So I have a book. You can't see my virtual background on my bookshelf. It's called The Diffusion of Innovations, and it's by Everett Rogers. Okay. And so what I would say with this is, in that book, it talks about the beginning starting point of any adoption curve of, when it's starting to take shape, is what you want to see is like these big institutions coming in, these big institutions signing off on stuff, starting to use the technology, whatever it might be, because that actually communicates to everyone else that this is trusted, right? For example, MasterCard and Chainlink recently partnered And that's a great example of a brand working with a brand in our space that connects them to, and it also communicates to everyone else paying attention that, wow, these big industries are coming in. Wow, this is going to be huge, right? And I think all that is really what matters most for our space from a perspective standpoint, is to show that it's valuable technology. And kind of when you see these big partnerships taking place, that's proof to everyone else paying attention that that the big providers that we see also believe in the technology. All right. And that's where you see all the news coming in. So I would say we're at a really great point. We've hardly touched when it comes to global liquidity of what's potentially going to come into the system. And I believe also utility tokens, I believe a lot of applications will have those really to incentivize all their stakeholders. But the other thing is for also buying power purposes. Now, my hope is we get the tokenomics in a state in that, and also we think about the market in a state where Bitcoin doesn't crash like my gaming project. Let's say I have an amazing video game like World of Warcraft. I used to play it all day long. Let's say gold was a token. Well, Bitcoin went down. Why is my gold going down in price? It doesn't make any sense. The game is doing great. You know what I mean? So from my perspective, I think we have to disconnect from the more speculative part of the market in many cases. And that might mean that we have lower valuations, more things that are more reasonable. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm a big fan of, continuing the technology and making sure it matures in a way that it's useful for everyone. Because I know that it sounds great when we pump, but it also sucks when you dump. And I know an average user that uses this doesn't want to say, today it cost me 2 tokens. Now, just yesterday it cost me, 1. Now it's double the amount because the price got cut in half. What's that? That's buying power, right? That's why you see the Bitcoin shopping cart meme. So that's the one thing I would say is we have to be mindful that people aren't used to things that go all over the place in price. They're used to consistency. They're used to so much consistency, they would rather hold their US dollars, which is a shit coin that goes down in value every year, than put that into Bitcoin that's more volatile. Think about that. That's the psychology, right? So when you think about a product and people holding tokens that are even more volatile, that aren't used to this stuff, that's why when I design things for clients, I come up with ways to build in fiats, to build in that effect. And when the fiat does come in, it flows into the utility token and helps incentivize liquidity creation through that means as well. Like it might even take in a credit card payment, convert that to USDC, it buys back the token on the DEX and then distributes that. Now I inject the liquidity into the chart. See how that works? So it's a matter of thinking about how these mechanics play out that I think will really transform our industry versus, all right, I'm launching a token and then it's all over the place. I think that's got to be tough, right? I think that's how shut it up in the general market to be able to work off of. So that's what I believe. We need more sustainability, less scams, more big companies coming in. And we need more reasonable volatility than we have right now. We love the pump, but the dump sucks.
Of course. And I think for me, it's all about sustainable buying pressure mechanics. That's it. Why does someone need to come and buy your token? What percentage of your buys are from people needing to buy the token to use it, or because of the value that it provides to someone holding it, as opposed to I'm buying it to speculate on the token? Because way too much of this market and way too many tokens are completely speculation led, which is why when the market does go out of favor, altcoins crash 40-50% because they have no sustainable buying pressure holding them up. I just think sometimes we need to think as a space of simple economics, supply and demand. And you figure out, you look at it that way, and you can have answers to these things because you actually do think through where that buying pressure is going to come from, where that selling pressure is going to come from of your own design, because you're the one that built the economy.
Yep.
Then I think rather than, like you mentioned throughout this, just, launching and hoping for the best, there needs to be real thought into these things because you can't often change this once you do it. Look, man, I really appreciate you jumping on today. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer. But yeah, I think we've covered more than enough value in this session for people that are looking to launch. I think this is going to be an incredibly valuable session for those dudes. But then also people that have already launched thinking, okay, so how do I revive this thing? What are the things that I can do? And pick some points up from here as well, man. So yeah, really, really appreciate you jumping on and providing the value and giving us your time. Any last words?
Yeah, I mean, if people take nothing away from today, take away a couple lessons. First of all, you heard how much I'm thinking about the people that are in the economy, how they think, their anxieties, their actions, right? Their behaviors. So I would say hardly anyone thinks about that. They pay attention to themselves. So that is not smart. So whatever I would say is think about the people that are using it. Those are your customers. Those are your users, right? And that's how I think about everything in my business. That's why the course templates, everything is free. That's why I think about how can I help these people? How can I give them something, right? It's always thinking about those individuals versus yourself. That's one of the biggest lessons that took me a long time to learn in my career that's been helpful across all this stuff. Like what might make someone excited? What might make them want to share it with someone else? See, that's a whole different frame than, oh yeah, I want them to share my stuff. See, it's way different. What might make them want to share it? What might incentivize them? What might make them excited when they join the community, as an example? If someone says hello, right? Or if they invite them to something, right? It's this kind of stuff that I would say is game changing. The next thing is also understanding liquidity. If you take nothing else away as well, take away the liquidity. Whenever you're distributing tokens, those could be sold. That could crash the price. That could come with a liquidity pool. That's people you're incentivizing. You might not even care about you at all and just happily are dumping on you and literally killing you. Every day you're waking up, they're punching you in the face and they're happy while doing it. You don't even realize it. So I'd say be very careful in those two areas, thinking about the people and liquidity. And again, if you need anything else, you can always follow me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of content there. I will be expanding more on my X and getting that going. But LinkedIn, I have about 15,000 followers, been doing that for 3 years, and I share a ton of content on just this stuff. And it's usually in about a minute to a minute and a half videos or quick bites and just really useful tips that I believe founders will need to pay attention to. So thanks a lot, Jake, for having me. It's a pleasure to connect again. Obviously I know your brother and are connected in many other ways. He's also an awesome guy. So hello, Dylan, if you're watching this. But anyway, appreciate both you guys. And thanks a lot for having me on as well.
Yeah, man, really appreciate it. And yeah, definitely anyone looking to learn more about tokenomics and how they impact growth and other things as well in the space. Tony does produce some really good content on LinkedIn. So yeah, definitely go check him out. But yeah, really appreciate you jumping on, man. Thank you so much. To everyone listening, appreciate you joining if you made it this far. And of course, we'll see you on the next episode of the Magnetic Growth Podcast. Have a good day.